The clang of hammer on anvil echoes through the smoky air, each metallic ring a heartbeat in a world where sweat and fire reign supreme. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit forge. Sparks dance like fleeting stars, and the acrid scent of burning coal fills your lungs. Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like to stand before a roaring furnace, your muscles taut, hammer raised, ready to shape the very bones of steel? Today, we're diving headfirst into the unforgiving life of a medieval blacksmith, an existence painted in sweat, soot, and unbreakable pride. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. Dawn breaks over a sleepy village, but the blacksmith's workshop is already alive. A single blade of morning light pierces through a tiny window, revealing ribbons of smoke curling around wooden beams. The blacksmith's apprentice, barely 10 years old, stands shivering in leather apron and gloves, clutching a small hammer that feels heavier than his hopeful heart. His eyes are fixed on the glowing metal, a sliver of white-hot brightness that promises both danger and mastery. Can you smell the smoke? Can you feel the heat licking at your skin? This is not a craft for the faint of heart. From the first blistered fingertips to the final triumphant strike that transforms a raw ingot into a gleaming sword, every moment demands unwavering focus. Yet within this furnace-born brutality lies a strange, magnetic allure. What begins as punishment, long hours, crushing noise, and the ever-present risk of searing injury, slowly reveals itself as a path to creation, to artistry. A single misstep could cost a finger. A perfectly forged horseshoe could save a life on the battlefield. It's a world balanced on the edge of a blade, and we're about to step across. Over the next several minutes, I'll guide you through the hidden corners of this fiery realm. You'll meet the children who traded bedtime stories for blacksmith's tongs, feel the rhythm of bellows and blunt iron dances, and understand why blacksmiths were revered and sometimes feared throughout medieval Europe. We'll explore the paradox of war and peace, how the clang of weapons forged in this very workshop could spell both destruction and prosperity. And crucially, you'll discover the unspoken pride that binds these ironworkers to their anvil, generation after generation. Are you ready to hear the roar of the fire and the creak of the wooden bellows as we peel back the layers of history and stand in the footprints of those who lived and died by their hammer? By the time we're done, you won't just know the facts. You'll feel the heat on your face and taste the grit of history on your tongue. So lean in, dear listener. Grip your own metaphorical hammer, and let's dive into the world where steel is born and legends are forged. In the coming sections, we'll begin with the tender but perilous early years of apprenticeship. How does a small child transform from gawking bystander to battle-seasoned craftsman? What secret tests and trials await within the smoke-filled forge? By tracing the journey from bright-eyed novice to hardened artisan, we'll uncover the soul of a profession that shaped medieval society. But first, take a deep breath. Inhale the smoky promise of transformation. Exhale all doubts, because once you step through the gate of the forge, there's no turning back. Let's light the first ember together and watch as history blazes to life. Long before the forge's heat became second nature, every blacksmith's journey began with an uncompromising initiation, childhood apprenticeship. Imagine for a moment that you are 7 years old, your small hands calloused by the rough twine of your first leather apron. You stand at the edge of a glowing hearth, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. The anvil, a hulking silhouette of iron and steel, gleams menacingly under flickering lantern light. Around you, the workshop smells of sulfur and hot metal, its walls scarred by centuries of sparks that leapt like fireflies in the darkness. In medieval Europe, families did not send children to apprenticeships lightly. Parents recognized that the blacksmith's trade was both blessing and burden. A reliable income, yes, but one earned in blood, sweat, and singed hair. At dawn's first grey light, the master blacksmith, stern figure of soot-streaked leather, would inspect each apprentice. A single misfit apron strap or slack glove invited a sharp reprimand. "You are not here to pet chickens," the master might growl. "You are here to bend iron like you bend your will." Your first task, as trembling as it may have felt, was simple. Fetch coal. Yet in every handful of black chunks lay the promise of hardship. You carried the weight of that coal basket as if it contained your future. One misstep, a stubbed toe, a dropped basket, could mean hours scrubbing the workshop floor with sand and vinegar. But each stumble taught discipline. Each blistered palm became a badge of honor. After mastering the basics of cleanliness and order, you graduated to stoking the fires. You learned to tame that hungry blaze, coaxing its flames higher with deft bellows work. Too little air, and the coals smoldered. Too much, and the hearth roared, threatening to spit embers across the wooden rafters. You discovered that blacksmithing was equal parts art and science, pressure, timing, and a keen eye for temper. Under your master's watchful gaze, you learned to read the color of metal, creamy yellow, burning white, or deep orange, and decipher its hidden messages. Like a politician reading a crowd, you followed every subtle shift in hue to know exactly when to lift the hammer. Next came the hammer itself, a deceptively simple tool that weighed more than you expected. The first few blows felt like slow motion, errors, each miss echoing your inexperience. But every clang on the anvil carried a lesson. You learned to align your shoulder, wrist, and elbow in a fluid arc, an unspoken choreography perfected only through repetition. A rhythmic strike at just the right spot could shape a horseshoe nail. A slightly angled blow could widen a bent, blade blank. Your master's calloused hand sometimes hovered above yours, ready to steady or correct your swing. Soon enough, the master entrusted you with what felt like a rite of passage, shaping small iron scraps into simple tools. A dozen horseshoe nails, a handful of woodworking chisels, a set of tongs. Each piece required patience, heating to glowing red, quenching in water, then grinding and filing until the edges gleamed. Your first perfectly forged horseshoe nail was a moment of pure elation, proof that your hands, once too small to grasp, the hammer could now command it. Yet the true test of apprenticeship lay not in technical skill, but in endurance. Winters were the cruelest. The workshop's door stayed open to vent smoke, allowing a biting draft to snake around frozen toes. Your breath clouded the air as you stoked the coals, and the sweat mingled strangely with frost on your brow. In spring, storms turned the dirt floor to mud, and the anvil's base shifted with every thunderclap. Through it all, the master demanded the same unyielding rhythm. No breaks beyond a crust of bread and water. At night, exhausted apprentices slept on straw pallets in a loft above the workshop. The forge's afterglow seeped through slats, painting ruddy stripes across their blankets. Dreams were haunted by visions of searing metal and ringing hammers. Would you wake to a fresh blister, or a chance at your master's nod of approval? That nod, when it finally came, felt like the greatest reward. It meant you had survived another day in the crucible, edging ever closer to joining the ranks of journeymen. Of course, apprenticeship extended beyond mere physical labor. You absorbed the anecdotal lore of blacksmithing, ghost stories about errant sparks awakening ancient spirits, or tales of legendary blades that turned tides of war. Each story, whether tall tale or kernel of truth, fueled your imagination. When your hammer rose for the 100th time in a single day, you dreamed of forging Excalibur, or of becoming the smith whose creations saved kings. And then there were the failures, inevitable, humbling failures that taught the toughest lessons. A cracked blade blank meant hours of reheating and reforging. A poorly quenched tool warped into uselessness. The master's sharp critique. Your heart wavers, boy, stung more than any physical burn. But with each failure, you learned resilience. You learned that mastery was not granted, but earned through suffering and persistence. You learned to treat each setback as another spark to fuel your ambition rather than extinguish it. By the end of your first year, the boy who entered with wide, fearful eyes had transformed. Still young, yes, but no longer an outsider to the forge's rhythms. You could sense the metal's mood, the tremor of impending crack, the subtle shift from red to orange. Your strikes fell with intent, your stance balanced like a dancer's. Yet beneath the growing confidence lurked humility, an understanding that the blacksmith's path was a lifelong journey, where no single apprentice ever truly arrived. Perhaps the greatest gift of this brutal education was the forging of character. You learned discipline, patience, and a respect for forces far more powerful than yourself. You discovered that every hammer blow was an act of creation and transformation, not just of metal, but of self. And when, after that first year, you finally earned a modest raise in your meager stipend, the coins felt heavier than gold, more than learn a trade. He endured a rite of passage that tested body, mind, and spirit. He learned that true craftsmanship demands sacrifice, and that pride forged in hardship never dims. Now, with the spark of your apprenticeship ignited, you are ready to advance deeper into the forge's heart and discover how a day's work can forge not only tools, but legends. In the next section, we'll pull bellows tirelessly, stoke roaring fires, and step fully into a single workday in the forge. Prepare to feel every strike, every bead of sweat, and understand why a medieval blacksmith's grind was more than labor. It was life itself. Morning's first pale light filters through a narrow slit in the workshop wall as you step inside, heart already pounding in anticipation. The forge's embers from the previous night still glow faintly, promising to erupt into fierce life with but a few more breaths of air. You tie your leather apron, its straps worn smooth by months of use, and pick up the bellows handle. With every push and pull, you awaken the coals, feeding them oxygen until they roar back to white-hot brilliance. The fire leaps, casting dancing shadows on stone walls pitted by centuries of sparks. By the time your master arrives, a hulking silhouette framed by the rising sun, you have already supplied the hearth with fresh coal and coaxed the flames to their hungry peak. He nods once, approvingly, and tosses you a length of iron rod. "Make it square," he says curtly. With trembling fingertips, you slide the glowing rod onto the anvil. The heat washes over you in waves, but you steel yourself, planting feet shoulder-width apart for balance. The first strike echoes through the workshop like a cannon shot. You follow with another, precisely on the previous mark, and then a third, bending the metal's hot curve into a sharp right angle. At once, you feel pride surge. You're no longer forging a horseshoe nail, but the very backbone of a plowshare that will feed families next season. No sooner have you completed that task than a frantic knock sounds at the door. A bedraggled farmer bursts in, sweat-streaked and anxious. His plowshare snapped just days before planting, and every moment without it costs precious crops. You exchange only a glance with your master, a silent question of priority, and then spring into action. You pull a fresh bar from the rack, hammer it flat, and cut a new share with skill born of early mornings and blistered hands. The farmer's gratitude, expressed in halting words and trembling fingers wrapping the hot share in sackcloth, sends a thrill through your chest. "You've saved my fields," he says. "May your hammer never cool." And for a fleeting second, you catch, yourself believing it, that your every clang helps hold the world together. But there is no time for reflection. A merchant, resplendent in fine wool and fur, arrives next. He tosses a finely crafted dagger onto your workbench, edge dulled by countless scraps of meat and rope. "Sharpen it," he demands, voice tinged with entitlement. You eye the dagger's uneven edge. Years of misuse have nicks that no novice could smooth. With practiced precision, you clamp the blade into the grinding wheel, water sluicing over the stone to tame sparks. Sparks fly outward, like fleeting fireflies escaping the dusk. As you guide the blade's edge at just the proper angle, the steel sings against the grit. A melody you know like a lullaby. And when you finally lift it, the dagger gleams with a polished perfection. The merchant runs his thumb along the razor's length, nods curtly, and drops a small pouch of coins at your feet before striding away. The forger's rhythm shifts at midday. The sun stands high, and the workshop becomes an oven. Sweat drips into your eyes, stinging with grit. You pause only long enough for a crust of hard bread dipped in ale, swallowed quickly so your next customer doesn't leave empty-handed. Even, the birds outside seem to taunt you with their freedom, their cheerful chirps a jarring counterpoint to the constant din of hammer against steel. Afternoon brings a different challenge, the production of a set of horseshoes for the local lords, prized stallions. Precision is paramount, one wrong curve, one uneven rim, and the horse could stumble, costing life and land. You heat each shoe until it glows a molten orange, then place it on the anvil's horn and shape the curve with deft, rhythmic strikes. With each blow, you feel the leather of your gloves toughen, calluses deepen, and confidence swell. When all 4 shoes lie neatly in a row, identical as twins, you quench them in water. Steam hisses, biting at your skin as the steel hardens into perfect strength. Between tasks, apprentices scurry like busy ants. One tends the bellows, another polishes tools, a third sweeps stray scraps of metal. There is a camaraderie in this shared labour. Silent nods of encouragement, brief jokes cracked over clanging iron. The unspoken understanding that the forge is both crucible and classroom. Even the animals outside, the master's old workhorse, the barn cats curled near the door, seem to recognise the forge's magnetic pull, lingering close as if drawn by the promise of warmth and purpose. Late afternoon light slants through the workshop, illuminating motes of dust dancing above the anvil. Your master, sensing a window before the final customer arrives, shows you a new technique: how to temper steel so that a blade holds its edge without becoming brittle. He demonstrates heating a narrow strip to a deep yellow, then sliding it into an oil bath with a practiced flick that sends ripples through the surface. You feel the hum of energy as the metal cools, and he allows you to try. Your dab of uncertainty gives way to elation when the blade emerges with a subtle bluish sheen, proof that the temper is right, but the day is not done. A town guard arrives at sunset, sword in hand, its edge chipped from a week of patrol. With measured patience, you file away the nicks, then polish the flat until light stretches down its length like a silver river. The guard, tired and cranky, grips the sword and swings it in a practiced arc. The blade whistles through the air, then comes to rest. "Good work," he grunts, tossing a heavy purse of coins onto the workbench. "Be here again, tomorrow at dawn." As dusk settles, the workshop's energy ebbs. You clean your tools, hammers, tongs, rasps, lining them by size and purpose along a wooden rack. You sweep iron filings into a neat pile, scrape the anvil smooth, and brush the floor until it gleams like riverbed stone. The forge's glow dims, but you feed it one last handful of coal, ensuring it will survive the night. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin anew. Before you leave, your master places a hand on your shoulder, an unspoken commendation for a day well done. His approval, more lasting than any coin purse, reminds you why this grind endures. You exit into the cool evening air, your muscles exhausted yet humming with vitality, your lungs still scented with coal and sweat. As you walk home under a canopy of stars, you carry more than the day's earnings in your pocket. You carry the forge's heartbeat within you. Tomorrow you will return, ready to shape fire and iron once more. But tonight, as you rest your head, you will dream of red-hot embers and hammer strikes echoing into the dark, and wake eager to feel it all again. For in the life of a medieval blacksmith, every day in the forge is both trial and triumph, forging not just tools, but the very spirit that binds artisan to anvil. There is a raw, unspoken honor in the life of a blacksmith, an elemental pride, born from conquering the fiercest forces of nature and bending them to your will. Yet for every triumph of steel and fire, there is a toll paid in flesh and bone. Imagine holding a newly forged blade in your hands. The cool, smooth surface belies the agony behind its creation. Beneath every polished line lies hours of blistering, heat, bone-rattling blows, and the sharp sting of metal shards. Is it worth it? For a blacksmith, the answer pulses in each beat of calloused skin. From the moment you step into the forge, pride and pain are inseparable companions. You watch molten metal glow like captured sunlight, and you feel a surge of exhilaration. This is the raw material of civilization, transformed by your hands. But almost as quickly, a trickle of sweat slides down your neck, mingles with soot, and carries microscopic fragments of iron into unseen crevices. Over time, those particles scar your lungs, leading to a persistent cough that rattles your chest long after the hammer has stilled. Many a craftsman has joked that the forge breathes through him, forged as much by coal and iron as by flesh and blood. The blacksmith's posture, hips squared, shoulders set, hammer raised, becomes etched into muscle memory. Day after day, you drive steel with unwavering precision, your hammer strikes echoing like a soldier's drumbeat. Yet each blow sends shockwaves up your arm, tiny fractures in bone, inflamed joints, and nerves pinched beneath skin. You learn to adapt your swing, finding new angles that ease the pain, but the ache remains, a constant reminder that your body is both your greatest tool and most vulnerable asset. Have you ever felt pride so intense it hurt? Pride soars when your work earns admiration. A perfectly balanced sword that feels like an extension of your arm, a horseshoe that fits a stallion's hoof as if it were born there, or a decorative hinge that gleams in sunlight. Villagers gather at your workshop door, marveling at your skill. "He's a miracle worker," they whisper. The master's nod in your direction is even more precious, a silent recognition that you have surpassed novice mistakes and earned a place among the forge's true artisans. In these moments, pain falls away, replaced by a glow far hotter than any coal ember. But when the twilight of a long day gives way to aching limbs and throbbing joints, you feel the cost. Arthritis creeps in, bowing fingers that once danced with the hammer. Your back, once strong as oak, arches with fatigue you can never quite shake. There are nights you awaken gasping, dreams haunted by white-hot metal and the clang of steel, only to find real life equally unforgiving. Should you push on? The forge demands it. Payments cannot wait, nor can hunger. And so you rise again, resolve hardened like the steel you shape. For every tool you craft that outlives you by decades, horseshoes still clinging to carriage wheels, blades still singing in battle, there is a wound that scars your flesh. A misplaced hammer strike can sever more than pride. It can carve flesh, crush bone, and leave half a dozen apprentices scrambling to staunch bleeding. You witness friends lose digits, entire fingers removed as cautionary trophies. Each loss is a grim lesson. Technique must be precise, respect absolute. Do you believe in fate? In a forge, fate can hinge on a millimeter's miscalculation. Yet it is this very danger that forges character. You learn to move deliberately, each step calibrated. You grow acutely aware of your own limits. A flicker of hesitation in your swing can mean an unwanted detour into your own flesh. Over time, your reflexes sharpen into something almost preternatural. You anticipate the metal's reaction. The bellows roar, the crowd's sudden hush when a blade snaps into form. Pain retreats into the background, acknowledged but no longer paralyzing. In its wake blooms resilience, the quiet courage to face the forge's torment day after day. Throughout the seasons, injuries stack like coals in the dust. Burns from wayward sparks, splinters from wooden handles, muscle tears from overexertion. The forge's heat can swell unseen blisters until they burst, leaving raw patches that sting in wind and rain. You discover ointments, a mixture of crushed herbs, animal fat, ash, and rub them into wounds, praying they heal before the next day's labor. Still, scars accumulate, white lines across knuckles, puckered flesh on forearms, faint depressions in the palm where a shard once lodged. Each mark tells a story. In quieter moments, you compare your scars to medals of honor. You recount battles fought and won. That burn, you say, was when I reworked the Duke's sword in half an hour flat. Younger apprentices listen, wide-eyed, absorbing both the glory and the cautionary tale. Tales of near-fatal mistakes mingle with triumphs of ingenuity, weaving a tapestry that binds the forger's community. Pain becomes a shared language, one that knits smiths together in understanding and mutual respect. Isn't that connection worth its weight in steel? But deep inside, a humbler truth lingers. Pride flourishes only when tempered by humility. The forge can humble the proudest soul, remind even the most confident artisan that metal, not man, holds the final say. A flawless blade can shatter unexpectedly. A horseshoe can slip from the anvil and deform in a moment of inattention. In those instances, ego shatters alongside steel, and you learn again. Mastery is an ongoing pursuit, never a final destination. Pain, physical and psychological, cleanses conceit and renews dedication. And yet, despite the relentless hardship, blacksmiths seldom stray from the anvil. Why? Because the forge offers more than livelihood. It grants purpose. Underneath the sweat and soot, there is a profound satisfaction in shaping the tools that build society. Plowshares that feed villages, nails that hold houses together, swords that defend realms. Each item carries forward your effort, your spirit, your legacy. In the long run, the pain fades into background noise. The enduring echo is the clang of metal, a testament to human perseverance. As the candles in the workshop gutter low, you look down at your scarred hands and can't help but smile. These hands have felt the fire's fury and emerged stronger. These hands have wielded power over raw elements and carved something durable, something beautiful. They have known suffering, yes, but also triumph. And in that duality lies the blacksmith's secret: to embrace pain as companion, not enemy, and to let pride in your craft light the darkest hours. So the next time you glimpse a polished blade, or hear the ring of a well-forged nail, remember the sacrifice that shaped it. Behind every gleaming edge lies a story of grit, of searing heat, and of unwavering pride. And that story, like the steel itself, endures long after the coals have cooled. If there is one constant in a blacksmith's life, aside from the roar of the forge, it is uncertainty. Imagine waking each morning, not knowing whether your hammer strikes will be paid in gold or leave you scraping by on stale bread. In medieval Europe, the blacksmith's prosperity rose and fell like the bellow's breath, dictated by forces far beyond his anvil: war, harvest, plague, and the whims of lords and merchants. Welcome to the economic roller coaster, where every clang of metal could mean feast or famine. Spring brought promise, fields turned green, farmers prepared for planting, and demand for plowshares soared. You'd rise before dawn, stoke the forge, and fashion iron plows that would till acres of fertile soil. The rhythmic cadence of your hammer felt almost joyous in those weeks. Each perfectly shaped plowshare carried with it the hope of a bountiful harvest. Requests piled up by midday. 4 more plowshares, and don't forget the coulter. Shape 7 spades and sharpen 12 hoes. The market's appetite seemed insatiable, and with it came steady wages. You counted coins in the evening light, planning to replace the worn leather of your gloves, or perhaps buy a new pair of sturdy shoes that would survive the muddy workshop floor. But then came the sweltering heat of midsummer, and with it a lull. Fields awaited the turn of plants toward the sky, and farmers were too busy weeding to think about new iron tools. Your workshop, usually alive with the dance of sparks, grew quiet. You tapped your hammer on the anvil, but only to reshape scrap metal into simple nails or horseshoe nails, tiny tokens that brought in pennies rather than pints of ale. Some blacksmiths tried diversifying, crafting iron cookware, decorative, hinges, or even simple jewelry. Yet these items rarely matched the income from agricultural tools. You found yourself switching tasks midday, chasing whatever work trickled in, and still your coin's jar rang hollow. Then, news of conflict would drift across the land. A border skirmish, a noble's feud, or an edict to armor militia for distant. Crusades. Word spread that swords and armor were in demand, and suddenly the forge became a hive of activity once more. You heated longsword blades until they glowed like dragon's breath, quenched chainmail links in cold water with hissing steam, and hammered plate armor into gleaming curve and contour. The clamor of hammer on steel was both exhilarating and grueling. Exhilarating because wallets swelled, grueling because orders poured in relentlessly. You hardly slept, rising each night to pour fresh coal onto the coals lest the fire die and delay a crucial commission. Every paycheck felt like a small victory, a buffer against lean times ahead. Yet wars could end as abruptly as they began. Victorious banners would wave, soldiers return home, and the demand for weapons evaporate overnight. You might find yourself with dozens of half-finished swords stacked in a corner, each one a monument to a conflict no longer raging. Orders dried up, and the only sounds in the workshop were the wind whistling through cracks in the door and the drip of water from your last plunge of a hot blade. You resorted to repairing old weapons, mending broken hilts, retempering dull edges for whoever could still pay. Pride in craft took a back seat to sheer survival. Every coin, no matter how small, kept the forge alive. Seasons turned, and with them came another shift: plague. When death crept through villages, markets shuttered and travel halted. Farmers stayed home to tend the sick, merchants closed stalls, even lords forbade gatherings. With no one to farm or fight, tools and weapons lost their urgency. You heard rumors of blacksmiths gone broke, forced to sell their anvils for a pittance or abandon their trade altogether. Some masters released their apprentices early, sending them home to live off what little their families could provide. It was a time when the anvil's ring was replaced by the hush of fear. In these dire moments, ingenuity became as vital as skill. You might barter your craft for food, mending a neighbor's plow in exchange for a sack of grain. You could pool resources with other artisans, share coal, trade tools, even rotate workshop shifts to reduce fuel costs. Communal support transformed the blacksmithing community into a tight-knit alliance. When one forge fell dark, another's lantern might guide a desperate apprentice through the night. Though coins were scarce, solidarity offered a different kind of wealth. When stability finally returned, after war, plague, or harsh winter, the forge's bellows breathed full life again. Yet you learned to brace for the next upheaval, keeping a careful ledger of savings for that inevitable downturn. You cultivated side skills, sharpening knives for local kitchens, crafting simple lock mechanisms for merchants, or teaching village youths the fundamentals of metalwork for a small fee. Diversification became your insurance policy against the capricious tides of fortune. Still, no amount of planning could completely tame the roller coaster's thrill and peril. There were years when the ebb and flow seemed cruelly synchronized. A dry harvest followed by peace, then a mild winter leading into a lackluster rebellion. In those stretches, you felt pendulum swings in your very bones. Exhilaration at sudden abundance, despair at sudden drought, until both emotions blurred into a persistent undercurrent of vigilance. By midlife, most blacksmiths grew adept at reading the signs, the chatter in taverns, the rumors in marketplaces, the quiet mustering of troops on distant hills. You'd hear the clink of extra tenders at the manor gate and know to prepare for weapon orders, or see merchants packing away farming tools and anticipate a slowdown. Your workshop became more than a place of labor. It became a barometer of society's rhythms. Yet, astonishingly, many smiths welcomed the unpredictability. They thrived on challenge, on the knowledge that their skill could tip the scales for farmers, soldiers, and neighbors alike. To forge a sword that turned the tide of a battle, or to shape a plowshare that guaranteed a rich harvest, it was power and purpose woven into iron and fire. So, while the blacksmith's income often resembled a roller coaster, climbing fiercely and plunging without warning, the ride was inseparable from the forge's allure. Each twist and turn tested not only technical skill, but resilience, adaptability, and heart. And for those who endured, The ultimate reward was more than coin. It was the indomitable spirit of creation against chaos, a testament that in every swing of hammer and pour of steel, they held a small piece of the world's fate in their hands. In every medieval village, the blacksmith's workshop was more than a place of labor. It was the beating heart of communal life. From the moment dawn's first light kissed the rooftops, villagers made their way to the forge's open doorway, drawn by its warmth and the promise of vital services. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and even children formed an informal queue, each person carrying a need as varied as the iron they would bring. A broken ploughshare, a dull sickle, a squeaking hinge, or simply the reassurance that in times of trouble, the forge would stand ready. Picture the scene on a cool spring morning. A farmer arrives, leading a mule so lame its fetlock fetters echo painfully on the cobblestones. "Good smith," he calls, voice rough from early rising. "My mule's shoe has come adrift." Within moments, the blacksmith's apprentice has yanked the old shoe free, and the master smith is heating fresh iron until it glows like molten sun. With careful strikes, he forms a sturdy horseshoe, fitting it precisely to the mule's hoof. As he clinches the final nail, the farmer exhales, a sigh of relief. "You've saved more than my mule. You've saved tomorrow's harvest," he says, pressing a handful of coins into the smith's scarred palm. But horseshoes were only the beginning. For every farmer who depended on the plough, there was a miller whose flour mill hinge had rusted shut, or a carpenter whose chisel blades had grown blunt. Goods and livelihoods hinged on these small repairs. The blacksmith's skill kept water wheels turning, carts rolling, and doors opening. He was, in essence, the village's insurance policy against breakdowns, an artisan engineer whose work underpinned every household's comfort and every noble's domain. Beyond tangible repairs, the forge was also a marketplace of information. Travellers paused at the workshop's doorway, sparing a moment to share news of distant markets or approaching armies. The blacksmith, ever at the crossroads of commerce and communication, listened carefully, passing word to farmers who might delay planting due to an impending frost, or to local militias who needed to prepare for unrest. "A smith's ear is as sharp as his hammer," villagers liked to say, acknowledging that the forge's low hum often carried the highest truths. At festivals and fairs, the blacksmith transformed from repairman into creator. He trod the same dance of bellows and hammer, but his output shifted from utilitarian to ornamental. Iron lantern holders twisted into graceful spirals, decorative gates crowned with fleur-de-lis, and wedding rings forged from precious metals for young couples. These creations spoke of beauty and celebration, reminding the community that iron could be more than mere practicality. It could symbolize unity, hope, and continuity. Children, wide-eyed and curious, flocked to the back of the workshop, where blacksmiths sometimes offered them small tokens, a twisted nail shaped into a heart, a tiny horseshoe to hang above the hearth. These simple gifts kindled respect and wonder in youthful hearts. "See that anvil," the master would say, "and remember that one day you may wield hammers of your own." In this way, the forge served as an informal school, imparting values of patience, craftsmanship, and perseverance. Yet the smith's role extended beyond metal. When disputes arose over land boundaries or unpaid debts, villagers often sought out the blacksmith, believing his impartial presence and steady hand could broker fairness. Under his roof, heated arguments cooled and compromises were hammered out. He listened to both sides, then used logic and community standing to guide an equitable resolution. In such moments, his hammer's clang symbolized not destruction, but the forging of social bonds. On winter's harshest nights, the forge's hearth offered sanctuary. Neighbors gathered around its radiant glow, sharing stews and stories to ward off the biting cold. The blacksmith ladled broth into wooden bowls while apprentices tended the fire with fresh logs. Flickering shadows danced across soot-streaked faces as old wives told tales of ancient dragons and fiery forges beneath the earth, a fitting parallel to the master's own craft. These communal gatherings reinforced ties of kinship and safety, reminding everyone that, whatever the storm, the forge stood as a bastion of warmth and solidarity. In times of crisis, whether an outbreak of illness or an invading force, the blacksmith's importance skyrocketed. During a nearby skirmish, villagers recalled how the smith worked through nights without pause, repairing armor and weapons for local defenders. He annealed arrowheads, reinforced shields, and even rebarred the church's ancient bell to summon aid. Because of his efforts, the village could hold its line until relief arrived. His steadfast presence under fire earned him gratitude and reverence that lasted generations. But being a community pillar also carried burdens. The blacksmith shouldered the village's reliance, knowing that any failure in his hands could have dire consequences. A misforged plowshare could doom a season's yield. A cracked armor plate might cost a soldier's life. He faced moral weight, as heavily as molten metal, understanding that the trust placed in him demanded both technical precision and unwavering integrity. To maintain this trust, he cultivated relationships built on honesty. Prices were fair and transparent. Apprentices learned not only how to smith, but how to communicate clearly about timelines and costs. Villagers respected this openness. When payments were late, the smith sometimes extended credit, aware that generosity fostered loyalty and community resilience. In lean months, he might even accept produce or labor in exchange for services, ensuring no one went without essential repairs. As the village grew and trade routes expanded, the smith formed alliances with traveling merchants and other artisans, coopers for barrels, wood carvers for cartwheels, and leatherworkers for harnesses. Together, they formed a network that could handle complex orders, a finely balanced ecosystem driven by mutual support. When a distant lord commissioned a set of iron gates for his manor, each artisan contributed specialized skills, coordinated by the blacksmith who managed the overall design and assembly. Through collaboration, the community's reputation spread across the region, attracting new opportunities and prosperity. By midlife, the smith often transitioned into mentorship. Apprentices who once fetched coal and swept floors now stood at the anvil themselves, forging tools and goods that further strengthened the community. The master smith, now graying at the temples, took pride not just in his own work, but in the achievements of those he had trained. Their successes became his legacy. Every well-balanced sword and every sturdy plowshare bearing silent testimony to his tutelage. As the afternoon sun dipped low, the workshop doors closed, and only the glow of the dying fire remained. Yet the forge's impact lingered far beyond its walls, in field and farmstead, in tavern and temple, in the very fabric of daily life. The blacksmith's anvil had struck more than iron. It had struck a chord of interdependence, forging a community bound by shared purpose and mutual care. When you think of medieval villages, you might picture thatched roofs and winding lanes. But never forget the forge's constant pulse. The blacksmith's hammer shaping more than metal, shaping society itself. In every repaired plough, every sharpened blade, and every ornamental gate, you see the reflection of a community's dreams and needs. And at its center stands the blacksmith, artisan, engineer, confidant, and guardian, a true pillar upon which the medieval world turned. In the world of the medieval forge, the flame of tradition burned as fiercely as the coals within the hearth. Blacksmithing was rarely a solitary pursuit. Rather, it was a heritage passed from parent to child, generation to generation, each family's legacy etched into every hammer strike and every glowing ingot. Imagine a young boy, perhaps 8 or 9, watching his father shape molten metal with practiced ease, his small hands itching to grasp a hammer, yet knowing the weight of responsibility that lay behind it. This was no mere job. It was a family's very identity. From the earliest days of his apprenticeship, the young hopeful was schooled not only in technique, but in the unspoken codes of conduct that defined his clan. He learned that the family name was intertwined with the quality of work produced at the anvil. A finely balanced sword bore the hallmark of his forebears, just as a flawlessly curved horseshoe carried the pride of every ancestor who had ever tended the forge. Reputation was currency, passed down like the secret mix of alloys that gave each family's steel its distinctive strength and hue. Meal times in the smithy's household revolved around the forge's fire. As embers cooled for the night, the family gathered around a wooden table scarred with burn marks and iron filings. Over thick bowls of stew, the master smith would recount tales of previous generations. The great-great-grandfather who fashioned the gate that defended the realm's northern border, the grandmother who, in a surprising twist, shaped delicate silver jewelry for a visiting queen, and the uncle who once repaired a line of siege engines in the dead of night to protect the village from marauding invaders. These stories served a dual purpose. They entertained and they taught, instilling in the youngest listeners a deep sense of belonging and duty. Training took place in both workshop and home. By day, the apprentice learned to heat, hammer, and temper under his father's exacting gaze. By night, he practiced the theory, mixing coal grades for precise temperatures, calculating taper angles for different blade types, and studying grain, patterns in polished samples. A leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed by age, recorded the evolution of family techniques. Here lay recipes for a particularly resilient plate armor, notes on quenching oils that produced a subtle blue temper, line, and sketches of decorative filigree that had adorned the handles of ancestral daggers. To handle this ledger was to hold the keys to centuries of accumulated wisdom. The bond between father and child extended beyond instruction. It was a crucible of shared sacrifice. When the boy's hands blistered after a long day at the anvil, it was his mother who applied soothing poultices made from comfrey and beeswax, her own hands once blistered in her youth. When apprentices talked of abandoning the forge for easier pursuits, the master smith, himself the product of years of sweat, offered counsel over a final cup of ale, reminding his son of the honor that came from mastery and the continuity of family pride. As the child grew into a journeyman, his skills matured under a blend of familial expectation and personal ambition. He traveled beyond his village, carrying his family's reputation on his back, taking commissions in distant towns and honing techniques gleaned from other masters. Yet every coin earned on the road contributed to the family coffers. Every new insight, be it a forged crossguard style or a novel alloy blend, was dutifully recorded in the ledger. This exchange kept the lineage vibrant, evolving with each generation without ever severing its roots. Marriage introduced another dimension to the legacy. When the journeyman chose a partner, the choice often reflected both personal affection and strategic alliance. Marrying into another artisan family, perhaps a wheelwright or a tanner, created a network of complementary skills that strengthened the community's interdependence. Dowries sometimes included specialized tools, a finely balanced hammer made by his prospective father-in-law, or a set of tongs heat-treated in a unique forge. The marriage feast was incomplete without toasts to craftsmanship and vows to uphold the family's standards of excellence. Children arrived amidst the clatter of sparks and the hum of the bellows. From the moment they could sit upright, they absorbed the symphony of the forge, the hiss of quenching water, the rhythmic pulse of hammer on anvil, and the comforting glow of tongs clasping hot iron. Fathers held their infants near the hearth, as if to consecrate them with the forge's fire, welcoming them into a lineage defined by endurance and creation. Early lessons were simple: gather coal, sweep floors, observe safety, yet each act carried the weight of future responsibility. Rites of passage marked the child's progression. On his 10th summer, the apprentice received his first proper hammer, its wooden handle carved with his initials and the family emblem. On his golden birthday, when he turned 16, he was permitted to forge his own emblematic piece, often a small decorative item like a brazier stand or a simple gate latch. Success earned him the coveted title of journeyman. Failure, while rare, meant another year of apprenticeship. These ceremonies were public affairs, attended by villagers and fellow artisans, signifying that the family's legacy had been entrusted to its next steward. Even after decades at the anvil, the master, Smith knew his legacy was not secure until the next generation proved worthy. He watched as his son, or daughter, in rare progressive households, took on increasingly complex tasks, repairing siege weapons, crafting ornate tools for the clergy, or even training their own apprentices. The familiar ache in his back reminded him that legacy was a cycle of hardship and reward. Every scar bore witness to a lesson learned, every polished blade a testament to family unity. In times of turmoil, wars, famines, or plagues, the family's bond tightened further. When draft orders called young men to battlefields, fathers hesitated before sending their sons away, knowing it was both a civic duty and perilous gamble. Those who returned brought back new skills, battlefield improvisations, captured techniques, even fragments of exotic alloys. Wounded smiths were revered as veterans of both hammer and sword, their injuries honoured as badges of service. Daughters, too, sometimes took up the hammer when male relatives fell ill, ensuring the forge's flame never died. As the master entered the twilight of his years, he often found solace in the sight of his child confidently commanding the forge's heat. His own hands, once steady and strong, now trembled slightly as he demonstrated final subtleties of tempering and cooling. Yet his heart swelled with pride, for he had forged more than metal. He had forged a living legacy. When he finally laid down his hammer for the last time, the anvil's final ring came not from his hammer, but from his successors, a resonant echo that carried the family's name into the next chapter. Long after the forge's fires cool for the night, the legacy endures. The family's techniques live on in new blades, new horseshoes, and new gates. The ledger's pages continue to collect innovations, each generation adding its verse to the ongoing saga. And in every corner of the village, when someone gazes upon a well-forged tool, they glimpse the invisible lineage that shaped it, the countless hands, hearts, and stories woven together by the unbreakable bond of family legacy. No blacksmith's workshop is complete without its arsenal of tools, each purpose-built, each with its own personality, and each indispensable in transforming raw iron into objects of utility and beauty. Step into the forge, and you'll see these implements arranged with almost ritual precision. Hammers of all shapes and sizes, tongs like mechanical fingers, chisels, punches, files, and the ever-present anvil, silent yet commanding. Together, they form the blacksmith's toolkit, a collection as vital as a knight's sword or a scholar's quill. At the center of every workshop stands the anvil, massive, immovable, and crowned with wear. Carved from wrought iron, and often faced with a hardened steel plate, its surface may bear thousands of dents and grooves, each a memory of past labors. The horn, its rounded projection, serves to bend and shape curves. The flat face absorbs hammer blows. The hardy hole accepts chisels and bending jigs, while the pritchel hole drives out rivets. To the untrained eye, it's merely a block of metal, but to the smith, it is both canvas and partner, a silent collaborator in each forging operation. Hammers in a forge are not one-size-fits-all. The cross-peen hammer, with its wedge-shaped peen, excels at drawing metal out into thinner sections. The ball-peen hammer, bearing a rounded peen opposite its flat face, shapes rivets and smooths metal. The rounding hammer bends and contours for curvature work, while the sledgehammer, heavy and formidable, delivers brute force for splitting and initial stock removal. A skilled smith selects the right hammer for the job, letting weight and balance guide each precise stroke. Tongs are the blacksmith's hands when the fire's heat becomes too intense to touch, forged in dozens of styles: flat jaw, wolf jaw, V-bit, bolt jaw. Each set of tongs grips specific shapes: round stock, square bars, or wide plates. A mismatched tong can slip and hurl a piece of glowing iron, so apprentices learn early that tongs must fit their workpiece like a handshake. Quality tongs feel almost like an extension of the wrist, transmitting vibrations that tell the smith how hot the metal is and how it responds to each blow. Behind every glowing forge lies a steady supply of fuel. Shovels designed for coal or charcoal carry precise loads of the right size, ensuring consistent heat. The smith uses a rake to arrange the coals, clearing ash buildup and maximizing airflow. Together with bellows, whether hand-operated or powered by water wheel, these tools regulate the fire's fury, letting the smith dial up blazing white heat or maintain a gentler orange glow for gradual shaping. Beyond simple shaping, blacksmiths cut, pierce, and refine metal edges with chisels and punches. A cold chisel, hardened to maintain a sharp edge, slices through iron when struck against the hardy hole. Punches, cylindrical rods with tapered tips, drive holes through heated stock for rivets or decorative apertures. Drifts then enlarge these holes to precise diameters. These tools transform a solid block of metal into complex forms, hinges, ornate grills, and even chain links. After hammering and cutting, the forge's products often bear rough facets and burrs. Files, flat, half-round, and round, refine profiles and sharpen edges. Rasps, with coarser teeth, quickly remove material to shape curves and contours. Apprentices learn to stroke files in consistent, steady sweeps, listening for the metal's changing pitch, a signal that the surface is becoming smooth. This final handwork lends a polished finish, revealing the true artistry beneath the smith's rough-hewn strike. As smiths advanced, they amassed specialty tools, rivet sets for forging fasteners, fullers for creating grooves and relieving stress, bending forks for intricate angles, and swage blocks, heavy cast-iron forms with various depressions and shapes, to mold metal into arches, columns, and ornamental details. Each of these implements expanded the smith's creative horizons, allowing the transformation of a lifeless ingot into a work of both form and function. Even the most seasoned smith must maintain his tools. A wire brush scrubs scale from tongs, and hammers, a whetstone sharpens chisels and gouges, an oil pot quenches files to stave off rust. Rakes clear ash from the hearth, while shovels remove spent fuel. Without diligent upkeep, the tools degrade, jaws loosen, edges dull, and misfires become hazardous. The workshop's hum includes the quieter rhythm of maintenance, a reminder that creation demands care. Tools were often personal. A young apprentice's first hammer might bear carved initials. A journeyman's tongs could have slight bends added to improve grip. Masters sometimes forged bespoke tools for specialized tasks. A bent paddle for smoothing red-hot hinges, or a narrow chisel for delicate filigree. These customized variations pass down through generations, further embedding family legacies into each implement. When the forge fires roar and the hammer rises, all these tools come together in a coordinated symphony. The bellows pump air, the hammer and anvil converse in metal's language, tongs grip and release, chisels carve detail, and files finish the masterpiece. The workshop becomes an orchestra, each implement a musician playing its part under the smith's watchful direction. Beyond their practical roles, the tools themselves symbolize the blacksmith's identity. A well-worn hammer and a set of reliable tongs were badges of honor, visible proof of countless hours at the forge. When a smith passed away, his tools were often bequeathed to a protege, carrying with them the weight of experience and expectation. The blacksmith's tools, from the mighty anvil to the humblest file, were more than mere instruments. They formed an ecosystem, each piece essential, each chosen with care and used with respect. In the hands of a skilled artisan, these implements gave birth to objects that built nations, defended realms, and enriched daily life. There are days when the forge's roar fades into the background, and all that remains is the exquisite clarity of success. These are the moments when every ounce of sweat, every blister, and every aching joint coalesces into a singular, triumphant instant. The first perfect strike on a glowing blade, the quiet gasp of satisfaction from a grateful customer, the approving nod of a master who rarely offers praise. In those fleeting seconds, A blacksmith feels as though he commands the very elements, bending fire and metal to his will, and in doing so, shapes not only iron, but destiny itself. Imagine you've spent the better part of a week on a single commission, a long sword destined for a noble's heir. Each day began before dawn, stoking the fire to precise heat, then hammering the blade blank until its profile emerged, a long, graceful taper that promised both strength and balance. You spent hours drawing out the fuller, that shallow groove, along the blade's spine that lightened the weapon without compromising its integrity. You quenched it in water, holding your breath as steam hissed and metal snapped into form. Then came tempering, the careful reheating to a subtle yellow, the swift plunge into oil that left the steel with a distinctive bluish shimmer. When you laid the finished blade on the workbench, it gleamed like captured moonlight, cool and impeccable. But perfection isn't declared by appearance alone. It's revealed in function. You clasp the sword's hilt, test its weight. Does it feel like an extension of your arm? You swing it through the air, listening for its song, a swift, vibrant whistle that tells you the balance is true. You press the edge against a soft bit of rope, and the blade parts it effortlessly, leaving only a clean, precise cut. In that moment, you lean back, exhale a breath you didn't know you were holding, and allow yourself a fleeting smile. Around you, the workshop stands silent, attentive to your unspoken verdict. The master approaches, places a calloused hand on your shoulder, and simply says, "Well done." That nod of approval resonates more than any coin purse ever could. It means you've transcended mere technique. You have achieved artistry. The sword you forged will protect a life, influence a duel's outcome, and become part of a lineage, a legacy far beyond your own. You have transformed raw, unyielding metal into an instrument of fate. How often does a craftsman taste such power? Triumph comes in other forms too. There's the time you restored an old kettle for the village inn, its iron sides pitted and rusted, its handle hanging by a single rivet. You meticulously removed decades of corrosion, forged new rivets to replace worn ones, and polished the surface until it shone. When the innkeeper dipped the kettle into boiling water, it whistled with renewed vigor, and he lifted it high for all to see. "Our smith has brought it back to life," he exclaimed, and the gathered patrons cheered. In that communal moment, you felt pride not just for your skill, but for the joy you had rekindled in everyday life. Perhaps your greatest triumph arrived under the darkest of circumstances. A travelling knight, wounded and fatigued, stumbled into your workshop late. One evening, his armour battered, his sword blade bent nearly in half. He offered you a pouch of gold, more than enough for any smith to raise an eyebrow. Yet you sensed urgency beyond payment. You set aside your usual routine, lit fresh coals, and worked through the night. The anvil rang steadily as you straightened. His blade filled in nicks with precisely applied welds and restored the edge with careful grinding and honing. At dawn's first light, you presented the salvaged sword. The knight tested its swing, then clasped your forearm in silent gratitude. "You have given me my life back," he whispered. In those hours of labor, you became both healer and hero. Forging more than metal, you forged hope. Sometimes triumph is quieter, almost intimate. An apprentice who once stumbled under the weight of his hammer now lands blows with confident precision. You watch him working a glowing shard of iron, the same way you once watched your own master. When he straightens and smiles, eyes bright with pride, you feel a surge of fulfillment. You know that your teaching, the guidance, the corrections, the shared stories, has shaped not just an artisan, but a keeper of tradition. That moment, when a pupil surpasses his teacher, is one of the forge's most precious rewards. Triumph also arrives in communal celebration. At harvest festivals, the blacksmith's tent stood as a centerpiece. Racks of gleaming tools, decorative hinges shaped into floral patterns, and an ornate wrought iron gate framing the entrance to the fairgrounds. Visitors marveled at motifs you had drawn from local myths. Dragons in flight, interlaced knotwork, and hammered textures that caught the sun's rays like facets of a gem. Children pressed their noses against the metalwork, fingers tracing the cool, intricate curves. Elders nodded in approval, recalling the sagas you had interpreted in iron. In those moments, you weren't just a blacksmith. You were storyteller, historian, artist, and guardian of cultural memory. Yet even these high points carry a charge of humility. You learn that every triumph in the forge is perched on a precipice of potential failure. The blade that sings today might crack tomorrow if you misjudge tempering. The decorative gate could warp if you quench it too rapidly. Success demands vigilance, respect for the metal's nature, and constant refinement of skill. Triumph and its shadow, failure, dance hand in hand, each teaching you to maneuver at the edge of possibility. With time, these triumphs accumulate into reputation. Nobles write letters of commendation. Distant guilds seek your counsel. Apprentices travel miles to learn your methods. You earn commissions that shape cathedrals, armories, and palaces. Yet despite the grandeur of these projects, the essence remains the same. The same dance of hammer and anvil, the same conversation between fire and iron. In every triumph, you return to the forge's center and feel that first spark of wonder, the recognition that you are in many ways an alchemist, transforming raw elements into instruments that shape lives. As the sun sets on another day of labor, you stand before the anvil, hands still warm from the last quenching. You trace a finger along a newly minted blade, feeling the smooth edge and recalling the journey from glowing billet to finished weapon. In that moment, you savor the forge's greatest gift, the knowledge that through skill, perseverance, and unyielding passion, you have created something that will outlast you, that will tell your story long after you've laid down your hammer. And so these moments of triumph, whether heralded by master's praise, knight's gratitude, apprentices' smile, or village acclaim, become the forge's everlasting embers. They light your path through the grind of daily labor, reminding you that in the interplay of pride and pain, mastery and humility, lies the true artistry of the blacksmith's craft. Decades of hammer strikes have etched deep furrows into your back and left your hands knotted with scars. But for a medieval blacksmith, age is merely another forge test, one you meet with the same unspoken resolve you once brought to your first anvil swing. As twilight filters through the workshop's small windows, you survey your domain, the anvil polished smooth by countless blows, the bellows leather cracked yet still supple, rows of hammers hanging like trophies, and walls lined with swords, plowshares, nails, and tools that bear your mark. Soon, this sight will shift from familiar comfort to poignant memory as you prepare to pass the hammer to the next generation. You rise before dawn, as always, stoking the forge with the ritual precision only years of practice can perfect. But today's work is different. No urgent orders, no desperate farmers or ambitious knights clamoring at the door. Instead, the workshop fills with the hum of anticipation as apprentices and journeymen gather, their faces a mixture of reverence and curiosity. They know this day marks a turning point, not only for your own journey, but for the lineage you painstakingly built. Your first task is modest. Forge a simple iron ring. We begin, you explain, not with grandeur, but with the basics that have endured since the craft's dawn. As you heat the rod, its glow deepening to molten orange, you feel the same thrill you did as a child, proof that passion never truly cools. With deliberate, steady blows, you shape the ring, gradually, bending it into a perfect circle. Each hammer strike resonates not just against the anvil, but within your own heart, echoing a lifetime of lessons, patience, precision, and purpose. Apprentices watch intently, their eyes reflecting the fire. You show them how to draw the metal evenly, how to maintain consistent heat, and how to recognize when the ring is ready for quenching. When you immerse it in water, steam hisses and curls around your outstretched hand, and the ring emerges with a darkened patina, that gleams like pewter in the morning light. You hand it to your chosen successor, your eldest apprentice, whose skill you've nurtured since his first tentative hammer swings. His fingers close around the ring, and he glances up, meeting your gaze with equal parts pride and humility. Next comes a more personal piece, a small, decorative iron plate engraved with your family's emblem, a stylized anvil overlaid with crossed hammers. In your youth, that emblem was merely a brand. Now, carving it into this plate feels like writing the final verse of a long poem. As you chisel each line, centuries of family legacy shimmer in your mind. Ancestors who built village gates, who forged swords for kings, and who kept hearth fires burning in the darkest times. The apprentices lean forward, tracing the emblem's curves with eager eyes, absorbing the story etched in metal. When the plate is complete, you affix it above the workshop's doorframe, anointing the entrance with your family's mark and inviting future smiths to step into history. Here stands a forge of devotion, you intone, voice slightly unsteady. May its fires burn bright long after we have gone. The apprentices exchange glances, understanding that this plate is more than decoration. It is a covenant between past and future, forged in iron and promise. As morning ripples into noon, you present your final lesson. How to temper a blade to both strength and flexibility, a balance that mirrors life itself. You heat a slender sword blank until it shines pale yellow, then plunge it into oil with a practiced flick. The blade cools with a muted whoosh, revealing a subtle blue temper line that dances along its edge. Mastery, you say, lies in understanding that metal, like people, requires both fire and gentleness. You watch as your successor repeats the process, her hands steady and her eyes focused. When the blade emerges true, you feel a jolt of pride sharper than any hammer blow. Midday passes into afternoon, and villagers begin arriving. Neighbors, patrons, and friends who have relied on your skill for decades. One by one they bring tokens. A horseshoe from a stallion you once shod. A plowshare you crafted in a bountiful year. A simple iron key from a house you helped fortify. They place these tokens on your workbench as offerings of gratitude and respect. You clasp each hand, nodding, in silent thanks, and at times your voice trembles with emotion you rarely display. These small gifts form a mosaic of your life's work, each piece a testament to countless lives touched by your hammer. As dusk settles, you gather everyone around the forge for a final toast. Apprentices hold wooden cups filled with ale. Journeymen raise their tankards. Even the master smiths you've journeyed alongside lift a glass. You speak quietly. Today, I lay down my hammer, but I leave you not with an empty forge, but with the tools of unity, knowledge, and honor. Carry forward this flame. You lower your cup, and the gathered voices echo. To the forge, to the legacy, to you. Before departing, you walk the length of the workshop, touching each tool as if bidding farewell to an old friend. You linger longest at your first hammer, its wooden handle darkened by sweat and age. You remember gripping it as a child, uncertain and fearful, only to grow into its weight and find in it both challenge and mastery. You place it gently on the anvil, as though laying to rest a companion of decades. Then, with a steady breath, you step outside, closing the workshop door behind you, but only for the night. Under a canopy of stars, you pause at the gate you once forged, now bearing the emblematic plate you set this morning. Moonlight glints on iron, and you reflect on a life spent shaping metal and moulding so much more: character, community, and continuity. You think of the apprentices who will rise at dawn, of the fires that will roar again, and of the countless stories yet to be etched into steel. Your feet carry you home, each step measured, eyes lifted to constellations that have witnessed every season of your toil. In your heart, the forge's pulse still resonates, a steady drumbeat of purpose. Though you have laid down your hammer, you know the craft endures in capable hands. The anvil's song will continue, and with it, the legacy of every strike, every spark, and every life forged in the crucible of fire and steel. Tomorrow, the forge will wake to new challenges and triumphs. But tonight, you rest, content in the knowledge that your farewell is not an end, but the first step in a new chapter for all those who will follow. And in that knowledge, you find peace. The golden sands of Egypt stretch endlessly under a blazing sun, their shifting dunes hiding secrets older than history itself. Have you ever wondered why the earliest alchemists looked to this land first? It all began with a simple word, Kemia, meaning black land, a reference to the fertile, dark silt of the Nile's floodplain. To the Egyptians, the very earth beneath their feet was imbued with transformative power, a living alchemy of life emerging from the river's annual gift. In the heart of Memphis and Thebes, priests and scribes gathered beneath towering pylons, their fingers tracing hieroglyphs that danced across temple walls. It was here that the figure of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, took on a new mantle, guardian of secret knowledge, patron of transformation. Legend held that Thoth inscribed the Emerald Tablet, a cryptic, gleaming slab of green, stone engraved with arcane verses. Though the original tablet vanished into myth, its words endured through whispered translations. That which is below is like that which is above, hinting at a cosmic mirror between earth and sky, metal and spirit. Imagine a dimly lit sanctuary lined with alabaster columns, the air heavy with incense and dust. In a secluded alcove, a priest practitioner heated copper vessels over charcoal embers. These simple flasks, spherical bodies topped with slender necks, hissed and steamed as crude mineral powders turned to molten slag. Black sand, rich in iron oxide, yielded rusty hues that hinted at iron's mysterious essence. Lumps of natron and pulverized malachite bubbled in water, each reaction a secret glimpse into nature's hidden chemistry. With every careful distillation, the alchemist transmuted base substances, earth, water, minerals, into potent elixirs, said to cure disease or grant longevity. Stories from papyrus scrolls describe vessels sealed with clay stoppers, buried in hot sands for days to induce slow calcination. A ritual heating that brought about profound chemical change. Apprentices, clad in linen robes, kept meticulous logs. On the third day, the mixture yielded a pale green extract, or the resulting vapors cured the cough of Pharaoh's scribe. Though modern science would dismiss these claims as superstition, the methods they pioneered, crushing, heating, distilling, laid the groundwork for all future laboratories. Egyptian alchemists also prized gold, the imperishable, as more than mere ornament. To them, gold symbolized the sun god Ra's eternal flame, a metal untouched by corrosion or decay. They believed that by perfecting the formulas hidden in the Emerald Tablet, they could not only produce gold from lesser metals, but also capture its incorruptible essence in the human soul. Temples of Bastet and Sekhmet occasionally housed small workshops where sacred metallurgists ground chrysocolla and malachite into pigment for ritual masks, subtly blending art and alchemy. Each brushstroke on a god's effigy bore the echo of transmutation, earth becoming stone, stone embodying divinity. Modern archaeologists have uncovered fragments of what may have been early crucibles, small clay pots with soot-stained rims set into hearths below temple floors. Analysis reveals traces of lead, copper, and tin alloys, suggesting that Egyptian metalworkers had already mastered bronze making by the mid-3rd millennium BC. Yet alongside practical metallurgy lay a deeper quest to understand the hidden languages of matter, to decipher how heat and time could convert one substance into another. Inscriptions hint at formulas, a ratio of 2 parts black sand to 1 part natron, or 7 cycles of heating at dusk. While such instructions puzzle today's chemists, they testify to a sophisticated empirical tradition. Through caravans and trade routes, this Egyptian knowledge journeyed north and east, carried by merchants, travelers, and migrating scholars. Bits of papyrus, wrapped in palm fronds, found their way into Persian caravans. Glazed clay tablets traveled as far as the Levant. Each transmission reshaped the law. Thoth morphed into Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, whose name would later anchor the Hermetic tradition in the Hellenistic world. By the time Alexander the Great reached the Nile Delta, mixing Greek curiosity with Egyptian ritual, the stage was set for alchemy's next chapter. Yet it all owed its spark to that black land, Chemia, and to those early seekers who saw not just mud and minerals, but the very keys to nature's deepest mysteries. As we leave the pyramid's shadow and follow alchemy's trail into the bustling markets of medieval Baghdad, remember this. Every experiment in those sanctified Egyptian workshops, every whispered invocation to Thoth, planted seeds of knowledge that would blossom into modern chemistry. Next, we turn to the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan would refine these ancient methods into systematic science. As the sun rose over the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, a new chapter in alchemy was unfolding. One, defined by scholarly rigor, vast libraries, and the warm glow of oil lamps in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Have you ever considered how a medieval chemist might have smelled? Picture a laboratory perfumed with the sharp tang of distilled vinegar, the faint sweetness of rosewater, and the acrid bite of burning natron. It was here, amid the clink of glass alembics and the hush of scribes copying manuscripts, that Jabir ibn Hayyan, known to the West as Geber, transformed alchemy from mystical art into proto-science. Born around 721 CE in Tus, Persia, Jabir studied under the legendary Hassan al-Ramah before settling in Kufa and later in Baghdad. His lab was a wonder. Stone benches lined with copper alembics, glass recipients of various sizes, and a dozen furnaces fueled by fragrant date palm charcoal. Here, he conducted hundreds of experiments, meticulously recording temperatures, reaction, times, and the hues of resulting compounds. His treatises, in Arabic, describe processes such as distillation, crystallization, sublimation, and calcination with striking clarity. One passage reads, "We heated 3 parts of wine with 1 part of gum saturni until vapors condensed into a crystal that gleamed like frozen light." Jabir's innovations weren't merely technical, they were conceptual. He posited that all matter consisted of 4 darat qualities, hot, cold, wet, and dry, in varying combinations, building on classical Greek notions but grounding them in observation. He classified substances into metals, stones, and combustibles, then devised methods to manipulate each category. His famous Corpus Jabirianum, a sprawling collection of over 200 works, laid out a systematic approach to alchemy. Define the starting materials, purify them through repeated distillation, then subject them to sequential heat treatments. To achieve transmutation, central to his legacy was the refinement of distillation. While earlier practitioners used simple clay retorts, Jabir introduced the alembic, a 2-part still consisting of a cucurbit, boiling flask, and a head that channeled vapors into a condenser. This innovation dramatically improved the purity of alcohol, essential for extracting botanical essences and for chemical reactions requiring controlled solvents. Ibn Hayyan's methods yielded pure ethanol, concentrated acids like nitric and hydrochloric acid, and the elusive aqua regia, capable of dissolving gold, a feat that dazzled both mystics and early chemists. But Ibn Hayyan's work extended beyond laboratory walls. In bustling markets of Basra and Damascus, merchants prized his sublimates: white mercury chloride for medicine, finely powdered antimony sulfide for cosmetics, and quicklime for tanning leather. Surgeons used his distilled alcohol as an antiseptic, long before germ theory would validate its efficacy. Even in architecture, his stucco mixtures, derived from calcined gypsum and marble dust, adorned domes and minarets with gleaming durability. Baghdad's scholars quickly translated Jabir's Arabic texts into Persian, then into Syriac and Latin, seeding European universities with newfound chemical knowledge by the 12th century. The office of chemist emerged as a respected profession, and alchemy evolved from secretive rituals to public demonstrations in academic settings. Students at Toledo or Salerno studied Jabir's diagrams alongside Aristotle's elements, forging a synthesis of Eastern experimentation and Western philosophy. Yet for all his empirical advances, Jabir did not abandon alchemy's mystical roots. He wrote of a prima materia, the first matter underlying all substances, and spoke of a philosopher's stone, a substance that would perfect not only base metals into gold, but also restore youth and health. But his true stone was knowledge. By cataloguing experiments and insisting on repeatable results, he laid the groundwork for the scientific method itself. Imagine the scene. A student in 9th century Baghdad carries a leather-bound manuscript of Jabir's distilled recipes to a courtyard workshop. He arranges alembics on brick furnaces, measures glassware with painstaking care, and watches as steam condenses into clear droplets, proof that nature obeys patterns legible to the diligent mind. Every successful trial sparks a thrill of discovery. Every failed experiment offers a lesson in humility. By the end of the Islamic Golden Age, alchemy had blossomed into a robust discipline, one that seamlessly blended theory, experimentation, and philosophy. It became the bridge between ancient Egyptian and Greek legacies and the burgeoning European Renaissance. When you next raise a glass of distilled spirit, or appreciate the chemistry behind porcelain glaze, remember the lantern-lit labs of Baghdad and the towering intellect of Jabir ibn Hayyan, whose alchemy remade both metals and minds. As twilight cloaked Europe in cool shadow, the torchlit halls of monastic scriptoria glowed with more than piety. They glowed with the promise of hidden knowledge. Have you ever pictured a monk hunched over a wooden bench, quill in hand, copying an Arabic alchemical text by the light of a single candle? In the monasteries of Chartres, Monte Cassino, and Cluny, these humble rooms became crucibles of preservation and innovation, where ancient Egyptian wisdom and Islamic experiment met Christian devotion. When Charlemagne's scholars founded the school of Aachen in the late 8th century, they envisioned more than grammar and theology. They sought the secrets of nature. Manuscripts in faded Syriac and Latin rolled into their libraries. Translations of Jabir's treatises alongside copies of the Emerald Tablet expositions attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Monks wearing woolen habits and leather sandals handled fragile parchments with reverent care, annotating margins with shorthand notes. Distill again at dusk, or test acidity by taste sparingly. Their quiet devotion ensured that when war and Viking raids ravaged Europe's cities, these monasteries remained sanctuaries for alchemical lore. Picture the Abbey of St. Gall, perched on a hill above verdant Swiss pastures. In its scriptoriums, long, arched room, scribes worked in pairs. One read aloud from the Arabic source, while the other painstakingly transcribed symbols into clear Carolingian minuscule. Sketches of alembics with bulbous vessels and coiled condensers adorned the margins, sometimes coloured with ground lapis lazuli extracted from distant mines. Across stone floors polished by centuries of bare feet, the air was heavy with the scent of ink, beeswax, and the faintest trace of heated vinegar from nearby alchemical experiments. Monastic laboratories, often separated from living quarters by a narrow corridor, hosted actual hands-on practice. Here, a friar in simple sandals stirred copper stills over a charcoal brazier, watching fragrant vapors condense into pale green acids. He measured pH crudely by tasting paper strips dipped in solution, noting whether they stung his tongue, a rudimentary but effective test. In another cell, a brother ground cinnabar into fine red powder, then heated it in a sealed crucible to release mercury vapor, collecting droplets of liquid metal in the cooler upper chamber. Yet these monks did not pursue alchemy for gold alone. They saw it as a path to understanding God's creation, to unraveling the divine geometry woven into earth and sky. When Hildegard of Bingen, noted abbess, composer, and polymath, described her visions of luminous rivers of light coursing through the world, her imagery echoed the alchemist's quest for hidden essences. She wrote of elements purified by fire in her Physica, blending natural history with spiritual metaphor. To her, transmutation symbolized the soul's journey from impurity to enlightenment. The monastic code demanded rigor. Every experiment began with prayer and fasting, invoking divine guidance before kindling coals. Brothers recorded each step in communal opera, workbooks stored on oak shelves alongside liturgical texts. This communal approach fostered collaboration. A novice might sketch an improved alembic design, while a master brewer lent expertise in fermentation techniques to refine distillation processes. Though cloistered, these communities were intellectual, crossroads where experience and faith forged each other. By the 12th century, monastic schools had become beacons for eager students. Scholars from Oxford, Paris, and Salamanca journeyed to study under monks who taught distilled waters, roses, marigold, sage, not merely as perfumes, but as medicinal tinctures. Abbot Albertus Magnus later drew on these monastic methods in his own expansive treatises, merging Aristotelian philosophy with empirical alchemy. His student, Thomas Aquinas, integrated this knowledge into theological frameworks, arguing that natural philosophy and faith were harmonious pursuits. Yet monasteries also faced tension between secrecy and dissemination. Some abbots guarded their alchemical recipes jealously, fearing misuse. Others believed that shared knowledge uplifted the entire Christian realm. Debates flared. Should the philosopher's stone be revealed to all, or reserved for the virtuous few? The resulting manuscripts often bore cryptic riddles. Only he who conquers the lion's breath shall glimpse the red elixir, ensuring that true understanding required both intellectual and spiritual preparation. When the great universities of Europe emerged around 1200, they drew heavily on monastic alchemy. Chairs of natural science included courses in magisterium artis, the art of transformation. Monks exported their distillation techniques to civic apothecaries and burgeoning medical schools, bringing alchemical practice into public commerce. The monasteries' secluded laboratories thus seeded a broader chemical culture that would flourish in Renaissance cities like Venice and Florence. As we leave the cool, fragrant corridors of these monastic centers, consider this. Without the monks, painstaking translations, experiments, and philosophical reflections, the alchemical flame might have flickered out in Europe's dark ages. Instead, their synthesis of faith and empiricism lit the way for the coming scientific revolution. Next, we embark on the magnum opus and spiritual quest, where alchemy's 4 mystical stages mirror the soul's transformative journey. By now, the alchemist's work had moved beyond mere chemistry. It had become a spiritual odyssey. At the heart of this quest lay the magnum opus, the great work, a 4-stage process that mirrored the alchemist's inner transformation as much as it transformed metals. Have you ever paused to wonder why alchemists spoke of blackening, whitening, yellowing, and reddening? These phases, nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, and rubedo, were more than technical steps. They were coded allegories of the soul's journey, from darkness to enlightenment. The magnum opus began with nigredo, the blackening or putrefaction stage. Alchemists heated their base metal, or prima materia, until it charred and crumbled to ash. In the laboratory, this signified decomposition, breaking down a substance to its essential components. Psychologically, nigredo represented the alchemist's confrontation with shadow, fears, ego, and impurity. The blackened mass was both curse and blessing, a necessary ruin clearing the way for renewal. As Paracelsus later wrote, one must descend into chaos to find order. From the ashes of nigredo emerged albedo, the whitening phase. The alchemist purified the remaining material, washing, distilling, and recombining it until it gleamed like driven snow. In practical terms, this stage removed dross and impurities, yielding a silvery, malleable substance. Spiritually, albedo symbolized purification of the mind and soul, clarity of thought, humility, and the soft glow of newfound insight. The process often involved sublimation, vaporizing substances and condensing them again, an act of elevation and refinement. Some traditions added a third stage, citrinitas, the yellowing or golden dawn. This subtle transition brought the first hints of color change, from white to pale yellow. It corresponded to the awakening of spiritual wisdom, the dawn after, the cleansing storm of albedo. Though later European alchemists sometimes merged this with rubedo, classical texts celebrated citrinitas as a distinct step, an alloy infused with the warmth of sunrise, the mind's first glimpse of higher truth. Finally came rubedo, the reddening phase, the crowning glory of the great work. The alchemist's vessel glowed with a deep crimson, and base metals, once black and formless, now shimmered in perfected gold. Rubedo represented not only the creation of the philosopher's stone, the legendary catalyst for transmutation, but also the integration of spirit and matter. In the alchemist's psyche, it signified the union of opposites, conscious and unconscious, mortal and divine. Carl Jung later praised rubedo as a symbol of individuation, the completion of personal wholeness. Alchemical manuscripts teemed with layered imagery, the dragon devouring its tail, Ouroboros, signifying the cyclic nature of transformation, the king and queen united in sacred marriage, representing masculine and feminine principles, and the pelican wounding itself to feed its young, illustrating self-sacrifice and rebirth. Each emblem guided the adept through the magnum opus, offering clues to decipher cryptic instructions. An emerald green serpent might indicate the need for deeper purification, while a violet phoenix heralded imminent rubedo. At the culmination of rubedo lay the philosopher's stone, the crowning symbol of alchemy. Far more than a geometric solid, it was the perfected substance said to grant eternal life, heal any ailment, and transmute base metals into gold. Yet true adepts understood that the real stone was inner transformation itself, the triumph of wisdom over ignorance, the harmonizing of body, mind, and soul. In this light, alchemy's greatest secret was not chemical but spiritual, to become the very gold one sought to produce. The magnum opus inspired generations of seekers beyond the laboratory. Medieval mystical orders, Renaissance magi, and even modern psychotherapy have drawn on its framework. Alchemical symbolism found its way into literature. Dante's journey through Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso echoes the stages of Nigredo through Rubedo. Jung's work on dreams and archetypes revived alchemy's psychological relevance, showing that ancient texts spoke to the timeless process of self-realization. By the mid-17th century, the age of mystical allegory was giving way to an era defined by precision, measurement, and reproducibility. If alchemy taught us to ask what if, modern chemistry demanded how much and why. At the forefront of this transformation stood Robert Boyle and Antoine Lavoisier, whose breakthroughs shattered centuries of untested theory and set chemistry firmly on the path of science. In 1661, Robert Boyle published The Skeptical Chymist, a polemic that challenged the prevailing Aristotelian and Paracelsian views of matter. Boyle argued against the notion of four classical elements, earth, water, air, and fire, and the idea of three life-giving principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury. Instead, he proposed that matter comprises corpuscles, what we now call atoms and molecules, that join in various proportions to form compounds. Boyle was relentless in insisting upon quantitative experimentation. He meticulously measured the weight of gases, observed how pressure affected volume, and conducted what is now known as Boyle's law, P x V Humker constant, laying the groundwork for physical chemistry. His emphasis on repeatable procedures, carefully recording temperature, pressure, and mass, set new standards for experimental rigor. No longer was it sufficient to note a substance's color change. One had to measure it, weigh it, and test it under controlled conditions. A century later, in sunlit laboratories near Paris, Antoine Lavoisier carried Boyle's legacy forward. Lavoisier's experiments on combustion disproved the phlogiston theory, the idea that a fire-like element was released during burning. By carefully measuring reactants and products, he demonstrated that mass is neither created nor destroyed, the law of conservation of mass. Lavoisier introduced a systematic nomenclature for chemical substances, publishing the Méthode de nomenclature chimique in 1787. He named elements like oxygen, acid former, and hydrogen, water former, helping chemists communicate unambiguously worldwide. His clear definitions and classifications turned chemistry into a language that transcended regional alchemical riddles, fostering collaboration and cumulative knowledge. Before Boyle and Lavoisier, experiments were often verbal narratives. I heated this vessel until vapors wafted forth. After them, chemists employed balances, graduated glassware, and thermometers, recording data in tables and graphs. The laboratory evolved. Benches were lined with labeled reagent bottles, notebooks filled with columns of numbers, calorimeters charted heat release, and barometers monitored pressure. This shift from mysticism to measurement distinguished chemistry from its alchemical roots. With the rise of modern chemistry, belief in a literal philosopher's stone faded. No experiment could transmute lead into gold without violating conservation laws. Yet the alchemical dream endured metaphorically. Chemists still sought novel reactions and new compounds, synthetic dyes, pharmaceuticals, and materials that seemed alchemical in their wonder. The spirit of curiosity and transformation lived on, now fueled by data, analysis, and engineering. Boyle's corpuscular philosophy and Lavoisier's conservation principles provided pillars for future giants. John Dalton's atomic theory, Dmitri Mendeleev's periodic table, Marie Curie's radioactivity, and beyond. The laboratory techniques refined in this period, distillation, titration, calorimetry, remained central to chemical practice. Yet modern chemists often pay homage to their alchemical ancestors. The curved flask of the alembic persists as the distillation apparatus. Lab coats echo the priestly robes once donned in Egyptian sanctuaries. And the quest for new catalysts or medicines resonates with the ancient search for the elixir of life. Have you ever felt that stirring in your soul when a personal crisis forces you to confront your deepest fears? Long before modern psychology, alchemists were charting this inner terrain through symbols of metal and fire. It was Carl Gustav Jung in the early 20th century who recognized that the alchemical magnum opus, nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, rubedo, mirrored the process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. Jung observed that alchemical texts teem with bizarre imagery. Serpents, crowned kings and queens, chimerical beasts. Yet beneath the surface lay a universal language of the psyche. He proposed that the philosopher's stone symbolized the self, the integrated center of conscious and unconscious mind. Just as an alchemist broke down impure metal in nigredo, a person plunges into shadow work, acknowledging repressed desires, fears, and traumas, before emerging into clarity. In Jungian terms, nigredo corresponds to the encounter with the shadow. You may experience this as depression, anxiety, or sudden crises that shatter old identities. The psyche's blackening forces you to acknowledge aspects of yourself you once denied, anger, vulnerability, or unfulfilled longing. Though painful, this phase is necessary. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. After confronting shadow, the process moves into albedo, the purification of mind and emotion. Therapists often guide clients through reflective practices, dream analysis, active imagination, creative expression, helping to wash away projections and false beliefs. Like distilled silver, the psyche becomes clearer, more flexible. Some individuals experience citrinitas as a creative golden dawn. New insights blossom, and the wounded psyche produces fresh perspectives. You might find unexpected strengths, compassion, resilience, creativity, blooming in places once dormant. This yellowing stage feels like the first rays of sunrise after a long, dark night. Finally, rubedo signifies integration. The various parts of the self, rational ego, intuitive shadow, emotional body, fuse into a coherent whole. You experience a sense of inner balance and purpose, akin to the perfected gold of alchemical law. In daily life, rubedo manifests as authentic, living, choices aligned with values, relationships grounded in honesty, and creativity that flows from a unified center. Jungian analysts employ alchemical motifs in dreamwork. A shattered chalice may signal emotional fragmentation. A shining gem suggests emerging self-awareness. Mandalas, circular diagrams echoing the Ouroboros, serve as tools for centering the psyche. By drawing or meditating on these images, clients externalize inner processes, tracking progress through symbolic stages. Today, you can see alchemy's psychological legacy in various modalities. Art therapy, where raw materials transform under creative impulse, echoing the magnum opus. Mindfulness and somatic practices, tuning into bodily sensations, just as alchemists read metal's hue. Integrative coaching, guiding individuals through crisis, insight, and transformation. Even popular culture borrows these themes. Heroes descend into underworlds, Nigredo, return with new wisdom, Albedo, Citrinitas, and emerge empowered, Rubedo. Whether in myth, film, or personal growth, the alchemical arc remains a powerful narrative template. When you next face a personal challenge, loss, transition, inner conflict, remember that the alchemists devised their art as much to transform the soul as to transmute metals. Their stages invite you to descend into darkness, purify your intentions, ignite new insights, and integrate an authentic self. In this light, every life crisis becomes an opportunity for inner alchemy. Close your eyes and imagine standing on sun-baked ground as far as the eye can see. Now picture that earth erupting into a forest of stone spires, each one carved by wind and rain into whimsical fairy chimneys that stretch toward the sky. Welcome to Cappadocia, where the landscape itself seems born of myth. Beneath these lunar-like formations lies a softer secret. Layers of volcanic tuff so easily shaped by human hands that entire cities were carved from the rock, hidden from view and time. The moment you set foot among these surreal pillars, you feel the hush of something ancient. The peach and ochre hues of the stone glow in the afternoon sun, and a gentle breeze carries the faint scent of sage and wild thyme. Birds wheel overhead, their calls echoing off cliff faces that, centuries ago, sheltered nomads and hermits. Look closely. Many chimneys bear horizontal bands of harder basalt, like black belts, marking former lava flows that shielded the softer tuff below. Those dark rings highlight nature's own artistry, a geological palimpsest of volcanic cataclysms and patient erosion. Yet the true enchantment lies not above ground, but below. Early settlers discovered that this soft volcanic rock could be hollowed with simple tools. A hammer and chisel turned the tuff into living rooms, kitchens, and places of worship. Light footsteps on dusty paths might lead you to a barely visible entrance, an arched tunnel yawning into shadow. Step through, and you cross a threshold from open air into labyrinthine chambers where silence reigns. And the only illumination comes from narrow shafts of sunlight or a single flickering lamp. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to descend into the earth's womb? As you crouch through the narrow stone doorway, the air cools instantly. Your hand brushes against walls still warm from the sunlit world above, yet you can taste the faint dampness of underground passageways. Every drip of condensation echoes like a distant heartbeat. Your eyes adjust to the dim glow, and you realize you are not simply exploring a cave. You are walking through a city, built stone by stone, room by room, by hands long gone. It was, unassuming at first, a family repairing their home's outer wall in 1963, chipping away at stone to make space for a new storage niche. Instead of finding a cavity or root, they broke through into the vast unknown. Dust swirled in a column as they peered into blackness and realized they had stumbled upon a hidden world. Derinkuyu, the deepest of Cappadocia's underground cities. Derinkuyu's name means deep well, and the comparison is apt. The city plunges nearly 60 meters below ground, equivalent to a 20-story building, spanning 18 levels in its original design. Estimates suggest it could shelter 20,000 people, along with their livestock and provisions, for months at a time. Clutching torches, explorers mapped narrow staircases hewn into rock, each step worn smooth by centuries of use. Along the walls, rows of alcoves once held oil lamps. Stone benches indicate gathering places or seating for clandestine meetings. Every new chamber revealed astonishing complexity. Ventilation shafts tunneled from surface to deepest levels, ensuring fresh air reached even the lowest floors. Secret doors, circular stone slabs grooved with iron pivots, could be rolled into place from the inside, sealing off passages against invaders. Kitchens bristled with niches for clay ovens and water cisterns. Stables featured carved channels for feeding and watering animals. A large room, nearly cavernous, served as a wine press. Its sloping floor and carved outlets channeled juice into earthenware jars. Archaeologists later uncovered a network of food storage rooms lined with ceramic jars, each capable of holding grain, pickled vegetables, or dried fruit. These pantries lay adjacent to corridors where families slept on raised stone benches. Carved niches in the walls held priceless icons and manuscripts, protected from damp by a thin layer of plaster. At the heart of Derinkuyu stood a chapel, its rock-cut apse and simple cross-relief still discernible under centuries of soot and dust. How could a people invest such labor and ingenuity into a hidden metropolis? Historians believe Derinkuyu's inhabitants sought refuge during waves of conquest: Persian, Roman, Byzantine, and later Arab invasions. When danger rose, entire villages slipped below, leaving only the faintest signs of departure. Tools abandoned in workshops, oil lamps left half-burned. Within these silent corridors, life continued. Children played tag in the expansive halls. Elders told stories by the light of lanterns, and craftsmen fashioned supplies to last until the threat passed. Today, Derinkuyu remains one of the most breathtaking archaeological sites in the world. Visitors descend steep staircases, sometimes crouching to pass through low ceilings, and emerge into vast communal rooms that once echoed with life. Interpretive signs mark key features, but even without guidance, the magnitude of human achievement is impossible to miss. As you stand in the central ventilation shaft, its circular walls rising like a stone well to the sky, you feel a profound connection to those ancient builders, whose ingenuity turned tough into a fortress and fear into sanctuary. Beneath the fairy chimneys and hidden entryways lies Derinkuyu's true wonder, an engineering masterpiece carved entirely by hand. Imagine a team of craftsmen, chisels in hand, wooden mallets swinging, hollowing out layers of tuff, the soft volcanic stone that made such excavation possible. Yet despite the relative ease of cutting, the designers faced monumental challenges: structural integrity, air circulation, water management, and security. First, consider the rolling stone doors. These circular slabs, some weighing up to 2 tons, sat in vertical grooves and could be quickly rotated to block passageways. From the inside, a handful of defenders could seal a corridor in seconds, protecting the lower levels from invaders. Each door bore iron pivot points precisely cut into the tuff, and small holes allowed peeking without exposing oneself. A medieval security camera that needed no power. Next, the ventilation shafts, over 50 in total, threaded from the deepest, floors to the surface like giant lungs. Carved with tapering walls to maximize airflow, each shaft ensured fresh oxygen reached every level while carrying smoke and humidity upward. In some chambers, you can still trace carved steps that allowed maintenance workers to descend into the shafts for cleaning, a clear testament to the builder's foresight. Then there were the water wells and drainage systems. A constant supply of clean water was vital to sustain life underground. The central well, dubbed the life artery, tapped into an aquifer and channeled water into interconnected cisterns. Floors sloped ever so slightly toward carved channels, guiding grey water away from living quarters into soak pits below. During heavy rains, the entire network acted like a subterranean moat, channeling excess water harmlessly into stone-lined trenches beyond the city's perimeter. Structural support came from a disciplined approach to column spacing and arch forms. Large communal halls feature thick, load-bearing pillars left uncut, pillars of rock that upheld the weight of villages above. In narrower corridors, gentle arches carved into the ceiling distributed the load evenly, preventing cave-ins. This blend of raw rock pillars and sculpted arches created both stability and a surprisingly spacious feel, even dozens of meters underground. The overall layout adheres to a zonal plan. Commercial workshops and stables near the upper levels for easy access. Living quarters and kitchens mid-depth to balance temperature. Storage rooms near the lowest floors where cooler, constant temperatures kept grain and wine from spoiling. This intentional zoning minimized travel time within the complex and optimized daily routines, proving that the architects of Derinkuyu were as skilled in urban planning as in stone carving. Engineering genius set the stage, but it was the rhythms of daily life that filled Derinkuyu's chambers with humanity. From dawn to dusk, albeit by lantern light, residents adapted their routines to the subterranean environment, turning carved-out rooms into functional homes, workshops, and communal spaces. A typical day began when a muted glow of oil lamps spread across the stone floor. In dedicated kitchen chambers, families clustered around low hearths built into alcoves. Women tended clay ovens, dough rising in ceramic bowls, while savory stews bubbled in cauldrons suspended from iron hooks. Smoke escaped through small vents connected to the ventilation shafts, preventing the interior from choking. Earthen pots and utensils lined carved shelves, and communal mealtimes reinforced social bonds. Elders gave blessings, children fetched water from nearby cisterns, and apprentices stirred embers for the next day's fires. Nearby, blacksmiths and carpenters plied their trades in carved-out niches. The region's native woods were scarce underground, but small caches of timber brought from the surface allowed craftsmen to fashion bowls, tools, and handles. Tuff itself served as building material. Small bricks cut from surplus rock lined oven walls or reinforced passageways. Artisans used bone awls and stone grinders to process hides and sharpen tools. The sounds of hammer on anvil and saw through. Wood echoed through corridors, mingling with laughter and conversation. Children attended lessons in communal halls carved with stone benches. Tutors taught reading, arithmetic, and religious texts, inscribing letters on small tablets of plaster. Spiritual life centered around hidden chapels, rooms with apses and carved crosses, their walls once painted with frescoes that have long faded. Priests led services by lantern light, baptizing infants and offering prayers for the living and the departed, maintaining faith far from the sunlit world above. Though confined, inhabitants took hygiene seriously. Washing chambers featured shallow basins carved into stone, supplied by the same cistern network that fed kitchens. Herbalists cultivated small baskets of medicinal plants, mint, thyme, and sage, stored in alcoves to dry. These herbs treated coughs, stomach ailments, and wounds. Midwives practiced in quieter corners, aiding births in private niches lined with fresh rushes. After work, families gathered in larger communal rooms, some holding over 100 people, to share stories, sing folk songs, or play simple games with pebbles and carved pieces of tuff. Storytellers recounted epics of heroes who once roamed these lands above ground, weaving a narrative that connected underground life to broader cultural traditions. The acoustic properties of the chambers, stone walls that carried voices with surprising clarity, made even the humblest stories feel grand. As lanterns dimmed, watch rotations began. Rotating guards patrolled narrow corridors, checking rolling stone doors and inspecting air shafts for blockages. The gentle hum of conversation gave way to hushed voices and echoing footsteps. In the deepest levels, some families opted to sleep in groups for warmth, huddled under woven blankets against the cool rock. Outside, conflict might rage, but within, these walls, a shared routine and mutual trust, fostered a resilient community spirit. Imagine slipping through a hidden doorway only to find yourself in a branching labyrinth that stretches for kilometers beneath Cappadocia's rocky highlands. Derinkuyu was not an isolated marvel, but part of a vast subterranean network linking at least 36 underground cities across the region. These passageways, some narrow as a person's shoulder width, others roomy enough for laden donkeys, formed an interconnected web that allowed communities to move, trade, and seek refuge collectively. Each tunnel bore distinctive features: smooth-worn floors from centuries of foot traffic, occasional niches carved into the walls for lamp, ensuring travelers never lost sight of the way, and strategically placed rest alcoves, small recesses where weary travelers could pause without blocking the passage. At junctions, signifiers etched into the stone, arrows, tally marks, even simple family symbols, guided people towards specific destinations: the water cistern, the chapel, or the marketplace areas higher up. In colder months, these tunnels served a dual purpose. Not only did they connect cities, but they maintained stable temperatures, a welcome reprieve from the biting winds above. Families would traverse hidden corridors under cloak of night, carrying provisions and messages between villages without revealing their movements to would-be invaders. Caravans of donkeys laden with grain or wine followed these routes, their bells softly jingling, so that supplies could flow to besieged settlements. Archaeological surveys have traced some tunnels stretching as far as 20 kilometers from Derinkuyu to neighboring Kaymakla and Ozkanak cities. In places, these tunnels narrowed to slopes and switchbacks to slow potential attackers. One passage features a deliberate pinch point, barely 1.2 meters across, where defenders could funnel enemies into a single file and neutralize them with ease. Elsewhere, widened chambers served as secret meeting rooms or storehouses. The sheer ambition of carving such mileage into volcanic rock speaks to an unparalleled cooperative effort spanning dozens of villages. Why undertake such colossal effort? Scholars have proposed several complementary theories explaining the motivations behind Cappadocia's underground cities, each rooted in the region's turbulent history and spiritual traditions. Cappadocia sat at the crossroads of empires: Hittite, Persian, Roman, Byzantine, and later Arab caliphates. During times of conflict, surface settlements were vulnerable to raids. Below ground, entire populations could seal themselves off, surviving months without detection. Stone doors rolled shut, ventilation shafts concealed by debris, and labyrinthine tunnels confused would-be invaders. Earthquakes frequently rattled the Anatolian plateau. Above-ground structures, particularly homes built of soft tuff, often collapsed under seismic stress. In contrast, carved tunnels and rooms, supported by rock pillars and arches, proved surprisingly earthquake-resistant. Communities could shelter underground until tremors ceased, then resurface to repair minimal damage.